Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time. I'm Rabbi Jaffe alongside Rabbi Londy, and this is part two of our discussion around Jewish thought on death and the afterlife. And when we left things off, we were going to talk about observances here at the synagogue and questions that we get. I often get, I'm sure you as well, many questions around how long is Shiva, which is kind of a funny question, and we'll talk about why. What should I do during Shiva? How should I prepare my own affairs to be ready? What do I do with a loved one who didn't prepare their affairs? And the big one around cremation, or perhaps a newer entrant, which would be composting of human bodies. So let's start with Shiva, if that's okay. And what advice do you give to congregants who ask you about what is Shiva? What should I do for Shiva? How long is Shiva? How do you come back to them with that?
Okay, so Shiva, the word Shiva comes from the root Shiva, which is 7. And so you are supposed to, and again, people make their own choices. You are supposed to sit for 7 days, and you are really supposed to be in mourning. You are not supposed to be taking care of yourself. You are supposed to have people who are taking care of you. You sit low, you cover your mirrors, you usually wear tattered garments or a tattered ribbon. You're not supposed to greet people unless you want to greet people. Like, you are really supposed to be inside yourself. There's also a lot of decorum that is appropriate for Shiva. You're not supposed to approach someone who is sitting Shiva and ask them how they are. You wait for them to start speaking to you. Usually you come with food. And Shiva is observed in obviously different ways in different places. I sometimes wish that people would take this full 7 days and really sit like in a very bizarre way. I mean, it's bizarre to have to be stagnant for that long. You're not really supposed to leave your house if you don't have to, unless you're going to services. But I think that people here get sometimes a little anxious about hosting Shiva. Does their house look nice enough? Are they going to have energy to talk to people? Are we going to have enough food? Who's going to bring the food? And it becomes a production. And whenever I walk into a house of mourning, I say to that person, and the person who's usually standing with them, which is not always the person who's mourning, I hope that you're letting yourself mourn. And I hope that you're making sure that they have the ability to mourn and don't have to worry about logistics.
Right.
I know that there's reality and then there's expectation, and those two don't always align. But our tradition really takes care of us in terms of how we sit Shiva. I think we should let it take care of us. It's a beautiful mechanism that allows us that time of really consolidated thinking and processing before we get up and just start functioning again.
Absolutely. And I think this is an area where you and I match very well, that as rabbis, we have to calibrate how much do we push our congregants versus trying to meet them where they are. When someone says to me, how long is Shiva? And in my head, I hear someone asking me, how long is 7, Rabbi? That I need to be supportive of that, but instruct them that it literally does mean 7, and that's where it does come from. Similarly, when I arrive at a Shiva, and it looks and feels much more like an evening dinner party, and there's tons of catered food there, and there's drinking, and there's dozens or hundreds plus people there, and everyone's schmoozing and talking, and it's the football game's on, and it just feels like a dinner party. That feels a little bit strange for Shiva. I remember several years back, I think they had 2 or 3 nights of Shiva at a house, and they had to make a run to get more alcohol. I think they went through $1,000 or something of alcohol at the first night of Shiva and had to go get more. And it really became almost like a social going out event around this. And then as the rabbi, if they want some sort of a minyan at that, we have to like sort of end the party for a moment and do the serious stuff so that they can feel as though they've done that, and then they can go back to the dinner party. And that's always odd.
Meaningful, which I think people do find meaningful.
It's all meaningful. And by the way, for you to feel less lonely and to be surrounded by all of your friends around you, like there's beauty in that too. I hope that people would understand the full spectrum of the Jewish experience and not just cherry pick the ones that are the easiest, because they might find that some of the harder ones are actually meaningful as well. And that you can be discerning only by fully understanding that. One reason when someone passes away at the synagogue, I send them this full halakhic guide of all of the different traditions and all of the explanations. I want them to know and to make informed choices. And they may say, I didn't realize that. I didn't know I'm supposed to cover the mirrors so I don't worry about what I look like. I didn't know I'm supposed to put a bowl of water outside so people can wash their hands ritually when they leave. I didn't know I'm not supposed to talk to the person, the mourner, until they talk to me, because maybe they don't want to make chit chat right now. All of these are learning opportunities. And as you said, sometimes around death, it actually is a very helpful moment to actually teach someone, because people suddenly want to be very machmir. They want to be very observant in a loved one's death as a way of showing respect to them. And I think that we can meet them where they're at and say, well, if that's something you really want to do, here's how to do it. The real tough thing is to make sure to do it always without judgment, and to say, I'm meeting you where you're at. And this is a very Chabad-like thing to say. Our job is not to make people to the level of observance that we expect. It's to take them where they are and to encourage them to do just a little bit more. And it's always a journey for them.
You know, it's always interesting for me is when people say, what would my loved one have wanted?
Right.
And I say, Shiva's not for your loved one. Shiva's for you.
Mm-hmm.
You buried your loved one. You were with them in their last moments. You made sure that they were attended to until they were buried. And you go from a period after burial from Anina, which is like this defined time.
It's like shock and trauma of
Shock
death.
and trauma. It's like totally liminal.
Yes.
And then you go from there to being a mourner. Those are two different statuses. You have different rituals for that time. And so I just want people to be able to mourn if they want to be able to mourn.
Mm-hmm.
That and what makes me anxious sometimes going into a house of mourning is I see the person with like a little bit of desperation in their eyes, like I just want to be with my own thoughts right now, and
Right.
they don't have that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I do like about Shiva though is that, and I see it more and more here, and I know that Shiva is not prevalent in the entire Jewish community throughout the country. I know New York is very much like a specific Shiva scene.
Do you think so?
Like I've asked other rabbis this, like in the Midwest and the South.
My California experience was very similar to the New York experience, as far as Shiva being like 2 days, maybe 3, make it a window of like 3 hours, maybe make it in the evening so people can come after work. That was very much the same. Are you saying that in your other experiences, let's say in the Midwest, was it longer, shorter, or didn't happen at all, or just different?
I think that there's less of a culture that everyone stops and goes. Like here, everyone shows up. The community is there.
Yes.
And other rabbi friends of mine have said, you know, in my community and not in the Northeast, people don't ask to have Shiva. And so I think that there's something so beautiful that you come and there's lines of cars there and
Yes.
everyone shows up. And also people who don't even know that person so well show up. But I want to go back to what I was saying about, is it for the loved one or for the one that's passed? Is it for the loved one or for the person observing mourning? When you are mourning, that is for you.
That's for you.
And you determine what you want in that moment.
And you shouldn't feel guilty for it.
You shouldn't feel guilty. You don't need to say, well, would my mother have liked me to do this? That's beautiful. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. But it's it's not what is right for you. It's what are you supposed to be doing right now?
One of the core aspects I've added to my own officiation of funerals is that once the casket is in the ground and once we have placed the earth on top, I say to them, and this is now a transitional moment.
Yeah.
When someone passes away, we are obligated to eulogize and to lay them to rest. You've now fulfilled your obligation. You did your job. Now we turn to the mourners and we say, that we talk about to the mourners, that may you be consoled. It's not about the dead person anymore, but with all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. And that is a statement that you should not feel guilty for taking care of your own needs. That's actually what this is about. Let's turn, because I'm sure that some of our listeners here would love to talk about and hear about cremation, because that's something that comes up quite often here. And people will come to us and will say, well, my loved one, their wishes are to be cremated, or I'm having them cremated. What does Judaism have to say about that? What can or can't I do? Can I bury ashes? Can I spread ashes? Can I keep ashes? I can go ahead and talk about like what my overall response to this is, but I don't know if you have any thoughts up front around cremation overall.
When I became an official rabbi in Israel, this very sweet, pretty observant American couple who had made Aliyah, living in Israel for about 50 years.
Mhm.
They asked me to come over to their apartment, and I did. They're still alive, thank God. So, so, so sweet. And they said to me, I know this is going to surprise you. And they also come from a history of people who died in the Holocaust. I know this is going to surprise you, but we want to be cremated. Would you do our funeral if it's a cremation? And I was shocked. I was shocked. Not because I didn't anticipate this in the Reform Rabbinate, but I didn't expect that they were going to be people who were going to ask that. And I had to actually decide. I had to decide in that moment if I was going to do it or not.
And what'd you do?
And I said to them, that is actually not within my comfort zone, but it would be so much. I feel that it'd be even less within my comfort zone to not officiate at your funeral if you died, that I am going to do that. But I want to know that your entire family's on board with it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get to your funeral when that is and have your children surprised by that. And they said, no, we've prepared them and we believe ecologically that this is the right thing. We don't want to take up space. And we've thought about this and we know that it's problematic Jewishly, and we've had other rabbis say no to us. I've kind of come further away from that. I don't necessarily feel overly comfortable officiating at a cremated service.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been in the situation. That's not true. I have been in the situation here. I think you did it and I didn't. Because I really do believe that in Judaism, you come into the world in a certain way and you're supposed to leave the world in a certain way. And it's not for me to judge and to tell people that it's right or wrong, but I think it is within my own framework to say, this is what the Jewish tradition does, and I'm representative, or I'm in conversation with the Jewish tradition. And I might go back and forth on this many more times in my life because I do see a reason for cremation. It's so much more ecological. It's instead of taking up space, and it's also much more cost efficient. But it also brings up the feelings of historical memory of Jews fought to be Jews and to die as Jews and not to be burned as Jews, and Jews were burned and Jews were cremated, and Jews interpreted that cremation as a desecration of their tradition and of their bodies. And so while I do understand and honor, and a part of me is like, what, that actually makes a lot more sense. The other part of me, the Jewish soul in me, says, I get that, but I also want to respect my ancestors who would be really offended by that. And so I'm between both of those places. On the one hand, respecting it, understanding it, maybe needing to get in line with it. On the other hand, feeling a little bit uncomfortable, just me as me, not as a rabbi. I approach it differently when I'm a rabbi. When I'm a rabbi, I approach it with curiosity and with respect. But for me, as my own self, I am a little uncomfortable with it. How about you?
I think that the rise in popularity of cremation speaks to the changing social circumstances in which we live. That is, if we were still living in a time in which we lived very close to our parents and grandparents and in the same town, the same shtetl, and the cemetery was close to town, and we could go there and we could see all of our relatives that were there and we could pay respect to them, that's one thing. If I'm living in New York and my kids live in California, or maybe I've got someone in Florida and someone lives in Chicago because they're having a job there, where do I get buried?
Totally.
Am I in some random cemetery where no one's going to ever visit me? Is that the point of why I'm being buried at all? Our families are spread out. We move from place to place. We lack that sense of connection to a place we come from. And so if any way I'm not connected, if any way it's transient, then might as well have a little bit of me spread in all of these places, or don't do any of this at all. I, like you, nevertheless, have a lot of hesitancy when it comes to cremation. And my first hesitancy comes actually really from a feeling, again, of humility. The Jewish idea is that the body that I inhabit was not something that I created.
Yeah.
I received it as a blessing. I'm renting, I'm not owning. And I drive around this car. And at the end of my car rental, I return it back to the dealer, and I don't get to drive it off a cliff. Instead, I give it back the way I found it. This also has to do with tattooing and such. Like, I don't detail the car because it's not my car, and my car was given to me, and the person or the entity that gave me this car did it because they thought that this is a beautiful and perfect as it is, and that shouldn't be changed in any way. And so I want to be careful. I want to be a custodian of this body, and I want to give it back the way that I
Beautifully
received
said.
it. So that's part one. Part two of that is I think that there's a dominant, what begins really in Greek philosophy, becomes later Christian philosophy, this idea of the duality of the body and the soul, and that the body is this unholy vessel that houses this pure soul. That's a very Christian, very Greek idea. In Judaism, the body is a holy thing. It's not separate that way from the soul. And so to burn the body is actually to burn a part of the self, that person. And I think this is, again, why I think a lot of Americans don't understand. As we are taping this, Ron Gavili's remains have still not been returned to Israel. It's the last hostage remain to be returned from Gaza. And I've been in discussions with them to say, why does Israel care so much about the remains? They've been dead there, let's say, for years, and who cares if we get the remains back? And in Judaism, it's really important. You can't fully grieve or come to terms with the loss. Ron Gavili's family is going to always wonder in the back of their head, maybe he's still alive. Maybe it's disinformation.
Hadar Golden's body was only, or the remains of his body were only returned after 14 years.
14 years.
And his family fought tooth and nail to get his remains back so that he would be rooted and grounded somewhere so that they would be able to mourn him.
My summer camper ma counselor, his troop commander in the IDF was Ron Gavili's father. So he knows Ron Gavili's father and the angst, and there's a sense that there is not a full completion you move on from this liminal moment into being a mourner. You can't do it. You are stuck in the chaos until this happens. But going back to my point here, that I think that cremation ignores the holiness of the body and can only really be understood under this Christian Greek idea of the unholy body housing the holy soul. And so I think that alone itself, that's the second reason why for me it's a no-no. Third, of course, is the idea of Jews burning bodies still within less than a century passed since bodies of millions of Jews were burned. It's just not something that we do. All of that being said, I'm like you, that if a congregant chooses to pursue this, then we are put in the case of saying, then what do we do now? And for me, I want to be able to accompany that person, even though I've made it very clear to them that if I had my druthers, that I would want them to follow the full tradition with this. I do understand to some degree there's the ecological, although it takes a lot of energy, to burn someone. It's not a net neutral kind of experience. The idea of not taking up space in the ground. There are kosher mausoleums that one can be buried in. And yes,
in Israel, where this couple that I spoke to was, there is an actual space issue.
Yeah.
For burial. There's an actual land.
But there are kosher mausoleums now as well.
There absolutely are,
yes.
Which are making the scenery a lot less attractive for some people.
In Paramus, there's a very large one as well. Then you get to the question of, well, then Rabbi, will you help me bury the remains?
Yeah.
I've helped to bury remains in the cemetery, just to dig a much smaller plot and you put them there instead. That felt very strange to me. You'll appreciate this. When I was in San Francisco, I don't mean to out this person, but one of our congregants was one of the head groundskeepers of Golden Gate Park, and specifically that quadrant of Golden Gate Park where the Rose Garden was. And it was illegal to do so, but I would make appointments with him from time to time to go with a congregant to go sprinkle ashes in the Rose Garden in Golden Gate Park because we could do so there.
As a criminal,
I did right then. So it may not be the worst thing that I've ever done. Other people will take it into the water and to release it or elsewhere. One way that I think we as clergy can often be helpful is that we can separate between the memorial service and what would be the burial. And the memorial service is something I feel completely comfortable. You don't have to have the casket in the sanctuary for it to be a kosher memorial service, and that can be something totally separate. The hard part for me, and this goes back to where we began around shiva, shiva begins when the body is buried.
Yeah.
If you don't bury the body, what is shiva? When is shiva? And where is that sense of finality? You don't actually heaven forbid, watch the body being cremated. You send it away and someone gives you back a vase of ashes, I guess, at the end. It's
Yeah.
such a strange way to not come to terms. And for me, there is no more difficult sound in Jewish ritual than the hollow thud of the dirt hitting the top of the casket. It's an awful sound that we know very well as rabbis, that thud and thud as people are scooping it on. And that is a necessary step, I believe, towards realizing the person is gone and confirming that this is really happening. I don't, for me, I don't know how I would be able to move on the same way without that.
I mean, I'm sorry to take it here, but after October 7th,
course.
people looked for teeth. They looked for fingers
Yes.
to be able to bury something.
Yes. Yes.
Like to have that finality
Mm-hmm.
and to go through that process, like to know that they did everything in order to find the remains of that person so that they could put them back into like it's a spiritual process. You came into the world and you're going back into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's allowing nature to do what it's having a respect for natural order.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there something about cremation for me is like not natural order.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me to process because I think that death is something that's supposed to be like spiritually replenishing for you.
Yes. Yes. Let's talk about then on top of that the newer idea of composting the body. And I guess in this situation, the body is brought from the funeral home to a center that adds it to basically like a large compost bin where the body is then over time turned into its essential.
Oh, I thought you were talking about something else.
No, this is like especially on the West Coast, you'll see this.
Like seed pods? Because that's something I've heard of. Seed like where
you get something back and you plant it, sort of a
get
thing.
Something the person is actually put into a seed pod. They're not cremated, like their body is contorted into a seed pod. This has become actually legal in Israel because the Israeli government does control the way that people are buried, and there's been a lot of legal issues around it, and cremation's also actually legal, even though it's very much frowned upon, but it's become a legal and recognized way of doing Jewish burial because it goes through all of those processes.
Interesting. In this case, someone would be really broken down as composted, and you would sort of use that compost around a tree, and then you could go visit that tree as the site of your loved one, that your loved one's remains are feeding that tree.
What do you think of that?
I mean, for me, again, it still falls into the same category of, first of all, the desecration of the body and seeing it as not being equally as holy as the soul or being separate from the soul. Number two, it's that lack of finality and confirmation of being able to lay someone to rest and to actually see the body go into the ground. You never see what happens to the body. It's almost like a magic trip. Like one time you see it, and the other you don't. Like something comes back, like Schrodinger's cat, and all of a sudden there's no person there. And what do you do about Shiva? I see all of these as being disrupting. And I'm going to sound very traditionalist here. We receive this legacy of hundreds of generations who have tried to live meaningful lives and passed on the best way to do so. And I admit that the world was different then, especially it's different if you're all living in the same shtetl and your great-great-grandfather is, buried this way next to your great-great-grandmother, and you're going to be next to them, and now we're all spread out. But there is a real cognitive and spiritual journey that this speaks to that I feel like these newer rituals just run roughshod on. It's almost as though someone received a treasure and threw it out for what was newest at IKEA.
When you were talking about
that's not a very nice way of saying it.
No, I don't think I understand what you're saying. The point was well made. When you're talking about the family cemeteries right now, I mean, it's so much about being Jewish for me is about understanding that I come from something that people fought and fought for and maintained and thought about and made sure to pass on so that I was Jewish today. And there is a family cemetery in Troy, New York, where my father's family is from. And one of the maybe it's kind of morbid, but one of the more interesting things that I've done is go there with him, and you walk around,
Yeah.
hear about the relatives, and you
Yeah.
see their names, like, oh, that's similar to my name. Was I named after them? Or they, 2 generations ago, they had a similar name. Was he named after them? And you start making connections. You realize, oh, they're a Levi, they're a Kohen.
Right.
Are we that? And you start making connections about who you were. And one of the things I really enjoy as a rabbi is going to, especially sharing gardens, where a lot of our congregants are buried for several generations, and people walk me around, say, "Oh, they were friends with them. They were friends with them. We don't talk to them." And hearing the stories of the people who existed, who came before us, keeping them alive, not that it gives so much significance to so many future generations, but if we don't look back at who we were, I think that we have a hard time looking forward as to where we're going to be.
I have so many reactions to that. First one, it's a beautiful statement. I'm jealous somewhat of experience like what my wife's family had at Kibbutz Yagur,
Yeah.
where they were there for several generations, and you go to Kibbutz Yagur, to the cemetery, and they're all there.
It's amazing.
And I was in Israel for Yom HaZikaron, for Israeli Memorial Day, for Yael's grandmother. Yael's grandmother lost both her brother and her son in fighting for the country. And so Memorial Day was a big deal. She lived to 106, and going with her to the cemetery with the military generals from, they would send high-ranking officers to be there, and there was a whole news story all about Yael's grandmother and about the story of her family. But the fact that they're all there together, and that my daughter Samara, now studying in Israel, can go and can learn about it and see it, and again see the Hebrew names, and there's Molly, my Yael's great grandmother was named Molly, who came to Israel, and that's who it comes from. There's such beauty in that. When I go to Sharon Gardens now, having been a rabbi now at Bethel for a decade plus, I walk into the Temple Bethel section, and you see a lot of just familiar people, and it makes me really like happy to see
Very
these
moving.
and with there's just memories everywhere. And I've even sometimes reached out and texted or emailed congregants to be like, "Hey, I saw your parent today. I was there, and I just want to let you know it made me think of you." And it's such a lovely thing. Rabbi Chaim Stern, you walk right by him right there. Did you know? I just learned this. You know that Elie Wiesel is buried at Sharon Gardens?
I did not.
I had no idea of this one. At my last stint in San Francisco, again, among the famous people buried in the cemetery is Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp from the OK Corral later on went to San Francisco as part of the gold rush, married a Jewish woman, and is buried in the cemetery. And
incredible.
Literally every day there are, we would call them Earpers, people who come to see the history there. But I want to say something, a sad story on this one. I remember the rabbi that I worked with in San Francisco, one of the longer term rabbis there, that there was a teenager who had died in a drunk driving accident. And whenever I went with him to the cemetery, he would stop to say hi. And because it was like one of his kids, it was a kid he had taught at bar mitzvah. And he always stopped by no matter what, just to come by and just to say hi and to remember. And that's such a beautiful thing. And that's this cremation composting that takes all of that away. And I love that. I'll share one last one if I can. Our group went to our Europe group trip from April and May. We're in the Warsaw Cemetery. In the Warsaw Cemetery, not just all of the names, there were a couple of Yiddish theater stars and writers, and on their graves were the masks of the theater. There was a mohel who was buried, and there was a knife and a glass of wine on it, and you could walk around, you could see what people did and who they were, and you read the Kohanim and the Leviim, and it's so amazing. You talked a lot in our last session about Novi Good and about around people from the former Soviet Union. People from the former Soviet Union, when it comes to funerals, they've adopted a lot of Russian motifs. You will find the wreaths there up at the cemetery. You will find headstones with holographic images.
I'm obsessed with these. Piano players.
Yes, and you will walk by, and the person's face will move with you, and it's kind of creepy. It's out of the Haunted Mansion at Disney World. but you can actually see what they look like or how people want to be remembered. And it's beautiful. It's like an open book of lives that you get to see. And I feel like all of these modern iterations, they ignore all of that. And so
I know.
I think there's so much beauty to be garnered from that.
My I really I agree with that. I just I find cemeteries to be, this is, again, morbid, but to be beautiful and moving and fascinating.
Yes.
My husband's currently in Israel, and he's been sending me some pictures of, people that he's been seeing, and he sent me also pictures of a few graves of people that he went to visit, because you have to go visit them because
Yeah. Keep going.
and it's so important to, it's, if we don't keep people's memories alive, then it's as if they never were. And I'm not suggesting that people who cremate their relatives are not remembering them. I know it's usually done out of love and and appreciation for them and out of respect for them. But I do think that the visiting of a place, and as you started by saying, we're not always located in one place, so it's really problematic. But having a resting place, I think, has significance. It's a full cycle. It's a full cycle. Then you come into the world, and then you leave the world, and you rest there.
The one closest, I guess, the area I've seen cremation that I appreciate the most actually is coming from Hawaii. And I understand Hawaii, in which you have such limited land overall, the idea of taking a part of the island by putting a grave. And you see, especially for a lot of locals there, when someone passes away, you cremate their ashes, and then you go out, and people will often go out on surfboards and paddle out to the ocean, or they'll go out in boats, and you'll form a ring, a circle, and people will bring flower leis and throw the leis into the circle as well, and then they'll spread the ashes there. And the idea of returning them to the sea, because the ocean is like of such fundamental importance when you're living in Hawaii, and that you're surrounded by it, and it's almost where we started, the idea of like returning the drop into the ocean, returning the spirit into the larger source. There is beauty in that, and the idea that when then you return to the ocean or to that spot, you're sort of there with them as well. Um, that's the closest I have found to that, where I can have a real appreciation for it, because I think it still keeps that sense of memory and location, a connectedness to ancestry and land. I don't know how to configure that, rectify that with Shiva and with the finality. But I've funny enough, been in the ocean on a surfboard and looked over there and someone's doing that. And there's real beauty to that ritual. That's something I could take up.
Okay, but
I'm not going to go to Rockaway Beach one day and do that.
That is of their tradition, and that is something for them to appreciate, to recognize. If when people ask us, what does the Jewish tradition say?
Right.
It does not say cremate, and so I think that maybe part of what we're saying is that if you're looking to the rabbis to get permission for cremation, we'll certainly give you respect and support. But when you're coming to us asking for what does our tradition say, it's never said that's part of the norm of what it means to be a Jew.
Yeah, I love that. I want to say one last thing about yahrzeit, if I can, and then I know we should really wrap up, although people may have more questions, and feel free to send them in about death and dying. There's this wonderful medieval midrash that I've taught from, and I stumbled upon years ago, and it has to do with Rabbi Akiva inside of a graveyard. I may have showed this to you at some point, or maybe you've seen it on your own, in which Rabbi Akiva, the story goes, who's a first century sage, but this is a much later story, is in the graveyard and sees this sort of darkened, blackened man hurrying back and forth. And he stops and asks what this is. And basically, it's almost like a modern day Prometheus. It's this man who has to stack wood there his entire life. And at the end of the day, it's always going to be gone. But if he doesn't do it, then his soul is going to be banished. And he stops and says, how did you get, like, what turned you into this way? What made you curse? And he says, well, I lived a terrible life. And he said, I had a child, and with a non-Jewish woman. I didn't raise him to be Jewish. He doesn't know anything, and no one's there to say Kaddish for me now, and no one's there. I know if someone said Yehei Shmei Rabbah for me, then my soul would be put at ease and I could ascend. And so in the story, Rabbi Akiva takes finds the kid in this village. So everyone hates the kid, and he circumcises the kid. That is a big no-no these days, by the way, to find a random kid and circumcise them. But Rabbi Akiva does this in the story. He teaches him Torah. He has him say Shema. He has him say Kaddish. And Rabbi Akiva hears the sound of like this, like a moaning of comfort of like this person ascending into like heaven. And it's this fantastical story, but I think what it really teaches is that when we remember someone, it's not for just their benefit, it's for our benefit. In this case, through the yahrzeit observance, this child who was uneducated and disconnected from his family and his community is recapacitated, is brought into the fold, is taught Torah, is taught that he has a family and a community and a tradition and a legacy. And it's a tikkun, it's a healing as much for the living as it is for the dead. And so when we remember and come together this way, sure, it's to pay homage to people who come before us, but it also has such a gift to us. And I love that story because the memory, and this goes back to how much we love being at cemeteries and being at funerals, is that it's really such an uplifting, life-affirming gift each time.
You're first of all, I actually don't know that story. That's a really beautiful story. And the more fantastical Rabbi Akiva's story is, the better. But, you know, when you're studying Torah, it's traditional to also say, you know, you're studying in the memory of someone.
Yeah.
And
always.
I love that the way that we, if you believe that you can raise a soul, or you can raise your own soul, metaphorically or literally, is by the study of Torah, is by passing on our tradition. I think that there is really nothing more poignant and beautiful than that. And I want to just come full circle for a moment that if you're debating about what you should do with your loved one, or if you don't agree with what they're asking you to do, inform yourself, learn, come speak to us, judgment free. We have our own feelings and opinions, but judgment free, and make an informed decision about what's right for you, and for your family.
I would add to that one of the most painful things that you and I encounter is when a loved one passes away without providing a clear direction to their descendants about what they want with that, when they don't have a medical directive, when the children don't know, or perhaps there are different views around cremation versus burial, where there's no burial plot. I would say
there's no will.
Right. Well, the best thing that someone could do beyond the will and the financial estate is you can already ahead of time not just purchase the cemetery plots, but you can already contract with the funeral homes.
Absolutely.
You can have that completely done so that they know your will already. That means that once you pass away, that your loved one just calls the funeral home and it's all set in line for them and all wrapped up in advance. And it allows your loved one then to grieve and to heal in a way that is not impeded by an endless line of to-do list items and decisions to make, often decisions that are heart-wrenching because someone is trying to discern what would my loved one want from me, and added to it the frustration of why didn't they tell me while they were alive.
So, well, this will be the last thing I say. My godfather was a rabbi, and he passed away almost 20 years ago. And he didn't have any children. He wasn't married, and he left the most explicit directions to the synagogue, to the people who were in charge of his trust, to everybody. But this is what my funeral is going to look like. This is where I'm going to be buried. This is what's going to happen. And it was so sad, but it was also so joyous because everyone knew that every single detail had been planned. And that was respecting his memory. That was respecting everybody in that room. And so that's just such a beautiful thing, that a gift that you can give to your loved ones. Just make sure that you communicate what you want, because then it just takes away so much of the pain of the tediousness of what goes into dealing with that.
And let someone instead just sit back with the beauty and the honor, the legacy of all the values and the lessons you left behind.
Absolutely. Amen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.